The Christmas lights twinkled along Palm Cove like tiny stars that refused to fade, their glow reflecting off the still waters of the bay. Inside a small yellow bungalow at the end of Hibiscus Lane, Evelyn Monroe sat by her window, her frail fingers wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea gone cold. She watched her neighbors laughing as they decorated their lawns, their voices echoing with warmth and family. For 10 Christmases, she had watched from that same window, 10 long years of polite silence, of waiting for invitations that never came. The first Christmas after Harold's passing had been difficult, but she'd clung to hope. She believed her children, David and Claire, would visit, that they'd keep the traditions alive, the family tree trimming, the homemade gingerbread, the candle they lit for their father. But that year, only a phone call came. "We're just so busy, Mom," Claire had said, her voice rushed and distracted. Maybe next year. Next year became a promise that aged and withered like the poinsettias on Evelyn's porch. By the 5th Christmas, the phone stopped ringing altogether. Evelyn had always been the one who held her family together. Every birthday remembered, every letter written in her elegant, looping cursive. She sent gifts even when no one replied. She mailed hand-painted ornaments, one for each of her grandchildren, even though she'd never met the youngest two. Each year, she tucked in a small note. "Love always, Grandma from Florida." Sometimes she imagined her children unwrapping those gifts, smiling fondly before placing them aside. But deep down, she feared the truth that they might never even open them. Her neighbors adored her. To them, she was Miss Evelyn, the sweet widow who baked cookies for every community event. They didn't see the loneliness behind her gentle smile, or how she sometimes left her TV on through the night just to hear a voice in the silence. Evelyn often replayed her children's laughter in her mind like a song from another lifetime. David's mischievous grin when he'd sneak an extra candy cane from the tree, Claire's giggles as she and Harold danced in the living room to Bing Crosby. But memory can be cruel. It brings warmth and pain in the same breath. That Christmas Eve, as the Florida sky turned a dusky pink, Evelyn placed 2 plates on the table out of habit. Then, with a soft sigh, she put one away. She whispered to the empty chair beside her, "Maybe next year, Harold. Maybe next year they'll come." The clock ticked on, steady and indifferent, as the old woman stared at the blinking lights outside, the only witnesses to her waiting heart. The days after Christmas always felt heavier for Evelyn. The lights came down, the laughter in the neighborhood faded, and the world seemed to move on, except her. Her house still smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, though no one else had been there to share it. She tried to keep busy. Every morning she walked to the dock behind her house to feed the seagulls. "Good morning, boys," she'd murmur as they swooped around her, greedy for crumbs. Sometimes she imagined they were her children, fluttering close for a moment before flying away again. Her neighbors greeted her with warm smiles and cheerful waves. To them, Evelyn was a picture of grace and calm, the sweet widow who never complained. But behind that gentle facade, her heart carried an ache that never fully dulled. She often spent afternoons in her sewing chair, mending old quilts and reminiscing. The photographs on her mantelpiece were fading, David in his graduation gown, Claire on her wedding day, and one of Harold holding their first baby, his eyes bright with pride. Evelyn would run her fingertips along the edges of the frames, whispering their names like a prayer. One humid afternoon, a letter arrived in her mailbox. The handwriting caught her attention, familiar, but not quite right. It was addressed to Claire Monroe, but the return address belonged to an old neighbor from back in Illinois. Evelyn frowned. The envelope must have been misdelivered. She hesitated at first, meaning to send it back. But curiosity and years of unanswered questions tugged at her conscience. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note. A few lines of idle gossip, the kind that passes between old friends. but one sentence struck her like a blade to the chest. "It's such a shame your mother sold the family home for money right after your father's death. Guess everyone grieves differently." Evelyn's breath caught. Her eyes filled with tears as the realization sank in. Was that what they thought of me? That she'd sold the house for greed? That she'd moved on without a second thought? The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She sank into her chair, the sound of the waves outside suddenly distant. For years she had blamed herself for losing their affection. Maybe she had called too often. Maybe she had been too emotional. But now she saw the truth. They hadn't just drifted away. They had judged her, condemned her for a sin she never committed. As the Florida sun set beyond her window, Evelyn whispered to the empty room, "Oh, Harold, they never knew, did they?" And for the first time in years, she cried not out of loneliness, but from the deep, stinging wound of being misunderstood by the people she loved most. The memory came to Evelyn in fragments, like old film flickering through her mind. Harold's coughing fits in the middle of the night, the stacks of medical bills she hid in a drawer, the long conversations where he tried to assure her it would be okay. They had always been a team, but when the bills became insurmountable, Evelyn had made a decision she would carry alone. Selling the house had never been about greed. It had been about survival, their survival. The house they had built together, filled with laughter and memories, had been worth more than money. But Harold's mounting medical debts threatened to bury them both, and Evelyn refused to let her children inherit that burden. "They're still growing," Harold had whispered one evening, his hand weak but warm in hers. "Don't let them carry our troubles." So she sold it quietly, with a heavy heart, and moved to Florida. She never told David or Claire the truth, not wanting them to feel guilt or sorrow. She said she needed a change, that she wanted a fresh start, and they accepted it without question. At first, the quiet town was lonely. Evelyn wandered the streets in the mornings, learning the names of neighbors and storekeepers, discovering the rhythm of life without constant obligations. She missed her children, yes, but she never regretted protecting them from the secret weight she carried. The misjudgment stung deeply. To know that David and Claire thought she had betrayed them, abandoned their childhood home for selfish gain, cut her to the bone. Every Christmas, every year of silence, suddenly felt heavier, not because of loneliness, but because of misunderstanding. And yet, in that pain, Evelyn found something unexpected: clarity. She could spend the rest of her days waiting for their forgiveness, or she could live fully, showing the world and herself what true love and sacrifice meant. She began to invest in her future, cautiously at first. A small garden by the porch grew into a lush display of hibiscus and bougainvillea. She volunteered at the local community center, helping families in need. Then she started the Harold Monroe Foundation, a small charity in her husband's name dedicated to helping families struggling with medical debt. Every check she handed out, every tearful hug from a grateful parent, reminded her that her life still mattered. Evelyn never expected recognition, least of all from her children. Her joy came from quiet acts, unseen and unheralded, from proving that love can exist even when misunderstood. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a simmering hope, not for their forgiveness yet, but that one day they might see the truth and understand that a mother's love, even when silent, never truly fades. It was a warm December morning when Evelyn's quiet life in Florida shifted unexpectedly. A local news crew arrived at her doorstep, filming a story about the Harold Monroe Foundation and its work helping families struggling with medical bills. Evelyn had agreed to the interview reluctantly, more out of duty to the families she helped than any desire for recognition. But as the camera rolled, she realized how far she had come. From a grieving widow isolated in her bungalow to a woman whose actions brought hope to strangers. That evening, the segment aired. Her children, David and Claire, saw it by accident. A coworker had sent Claire a link, thinking she might be interested. David received a forwarded email from a distant cousin. Both of them sat in stunned silence, eyes wide as the story unfolded. The charity, the countless families helped, and the love that had motivated it all. For the first time in 10 years they understood. Their mother had not abandoned them. She had not been selfish. She had carried a burden alone to protect them, to ensure their lives remained untainted by their father's debts. Within hours, their plane tickets were booked. Claire clutched her husband's arm as tears streamed down her face. David barely spoke, his hands trembling as he dialed their mother's number. "Mom, we didn't know." When they arrived in Florida, Evelyn opened the door and saw them standing there, expressions raw with guilt and longing. She felt a flood of emotions, relief, sadness, pride, and a quiet, simmering satisfaction. Her revenge had not been loud or vengeful. She had not shamed them, not lashed out. Her revenge had been to live well, to create meaning, and to let the truth shine so brightly that it could no longer be ignored. Claire fell into her arms, sobbing, We thought you didn't care. We were so wrong, Mom, so terribly wrong." David followed, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "Forgive us, please. We judged you without knowing anything." Evelyn hugged them both, feeling the years of pain and misunderstanding melt away. "I forgive you," she said softly, "but more than that, I hope you understand now. Love isn't always easy to see, but it's never gone." That Christmas, her bungalow was alive again. The aroma of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air. Laughter echoed off the walls, but it was different this time, slower, deeper, wiser. Evelyn watched her grandchildren hang ornaments on the tree, the same ones she had sent every year, now finally cherished in her arms. As she glanced at Harold's photo on the mantel, she whispered, "We did it, love. They're home." Her revenge had been subtle but profound. She had turned misunderstanding into action, loneliness into love, and betrayal into proof that grace and resilience could create their own form of justice. That year, for the first time in a decade, Evelyn slept on Christmas Eve with a heart lighter than it had been in years, full of love, peace, and quiet triumph.